In this video, I'm going to look at some HTML and corresponding JavaScript for a few different types of inputs. So I'm going to look at a date input, color input, and then sort of a data list, or what I'll call an autocomplete. The code for this example can be found at the URL here. So there's not much design at all on this page. It's pretty bland looking. The focus is on the HTML and the corresponding JavaScript. So we made here first a color picker. So that's an input type in HTML5, and we click on the color, and then it gives you the browsers. In this case, I'm in Edge. Gives you this slide, so I can sort of control the basic hue. So let's go for a blue, and then I can pick within here some shade, and that then picks a color, and then I'm displaying here the hex value for the code, which is sort of the main output of this. And then I've converted it to RGB numbers, and then to HSL, hue, saturation, lightness, or luminous. I don't know, frankly. But that's just some calculation. So I'll skim over the calculation, and then if you want to look at it in more detail, I give you one a link, and two, I've given you the code, and that includes a link. My main purpose is to show you different types of inputs. So here is a date input. So this is, click on the date input. It gives you a calendar. I'm doing this on January 14th. I will choose 27th, and then I'm displaying out the simple date. Then I chose I made a corresponding date object, and then I said, how far is that from now? I spelled from wrong. Okay, so that was the second kind of input I want to show you. And then here is this data list, or autocomplete. So it's sort of a halfway between a text input where the user types stuff and the drop-down select. And so I can start to type things, and then it takes my list of options and reduces them. And so I can type something. So right now, just having typed an O, I'm left with chocolate, rocky road, and chocolate chip. Now I'm allowed to just type what I want, orange, and not choose one of the choices, or I can choose one of the choices. Let's go with rocky road. So again, it's this hybrid between text input and drop-down select, and that's a data list. And as I did when I looked at selects, so this is the same overall functionality, but now O is for orange sherbet. I will have one where I hard code or have the options of design, and another one where I sort of add them dynamically, but that either way that works. Okay, so that's the page. Now let's look at how that was made. Okay, so here's the basic page. No styling, that's why it looks so bland. Let me get rid of the Explorer, so more space for the code. Okay, so here was a label for the color input, and then here was the input of the color type. And I gave it an ID so I can work with it in code. And then here's a place for me to display information about color. Next, on down on the list was the date. And so here's a header for the date, a label for the date, the input of the date type. So again, so these first two are just variations of inputs, a color input, a date input, and then here a div to display the date information. And then a header about the data list, a label about the entering a flavor, here is an input of the text type, but it is associated with a list of flavors. And then there is a following data list with an ID of flavors. So this list of my text input is matching the ID of my data list. And that makes that connection between my, so that when you type in, so the data list doesn't show on the page when you start, it only as you begin to type, as you put yourself into the text input and begin to type, then the options begin to show and whittle their way down to just the ones that match. And you don't write that code's automatically in the browser. And there's a difference here in the options compared to what this is both what you will in a select. Usually you have something between open option and close option, and the value is more optional. Sorry for the so you typically in a select you have open option, close option, and you almost definitely have something between them, because that's what that's what the user sees. And then you may opt to have a different value than you work with behind the scenes, and a data list sort of reverses that, where the value becomes more important, and that is sort of what is seen. And then something between the options, which I chose not to do, is more like a comment, or not a comment that you don't see, but more like a remark or something that you know, if somebody chose vanilla, you might say, oh, you would choose that. Okay, so that is the data list, the spot to display stuff about the flavor. And then I'm doing it again, but this time with an empty data list. So here's my input of the text type with a list called flavors2, and then here's my data list with an ID of flavors2, which is right now empty, and I'm going to add to that list dynamically. Okay, and then here's a place for displaying flavor2 information. Okay. So here is the code. I'm giving all of these inputs input events. So I'm adding event listeners, all of the input type, calling various functions. So each one of these things has an input event listener connecting to a function. So sort of out of order here, but this is, it's not out of order in terms of how it gets executed, because this code, in terms of what you saw up there, this is relating to the last one, the flavor2, but in another sense, all the code that follows after this is going to be functions that get executed when they're called, whereas this code is not in a function and will be executed sort of when we get to the bottom of the page. So here's my array of chocolate, marshmallow, orange sherbet, and peanut butter. I was too lazy to write more. And then I get a code version of my flavors, which was my data list. Flavors2 was my data list. The thing with an ID. So there's the input has an ID of flavor input 2, but the data list has an ID of flavors2. So I'm grabbing the data list. Maybe I should have put DD here to emphasize that it was a data list. And I'm looping over my flavors array. And here I went with, and I'm giving it a value. Again, value is the more important thing in a data list, and making it the item of the array. So I don't need the index. I just tend to always do item and index because sometimes I want the index, but I'm not doing anything with the index right here. So the option value is the item, which is the flavor, and then I'm appending. So here I'm working with the append child version. Okay, so that is dynamically adding the data list options for that second flavor input. Okay, here's the function called by my color. I'm grabbing the value and calling it user color, and I am just displaying that at first. So the hex code that we saw, that's what sort of automatically comes out of the user picker, so the color picker. So I had an input of the color type, and its most basic input, or the value, if you just grab the value off the page, it is hex code. And I didn't want that. Let me open with the live server. Choose some kind of red. There we go. And it has that pound sign, that hashtag, as part of it. So that's part of what comes in. So it'll be 6 letters, or 6 numbers or letters, 0 to 9 or A to F, and with the pound sign in front. Okay, so that's what comes out of it. And that's sort of a normally, if you're doing some kind of interaction, if I was going to set something on the web page equal to that color, that's usually the form I want. But I'm showing here, I'll talk about it briefly, quickly, but here's me parsing the substring and grabbing, so these are the letters, hey, 0 starts it, but 0 would be that pound sign. So from 1 up to 3, including 1, but not including 3, those are the letters, and those are the characters that correspond to red, and they're in hexadecimal. So if I parse the integer with this radix of 16, then I will get the amount of red, which is between 0 and 255. If I go from start at 3 and go up to but not including 5, that's the green. And if I start at 5 and go up to and not including 7, because there is no 7, or there is no 7. That is so I probably could have skipped this for the blue. I probably could have skipped that second parameter. And that is the number that corresponds to blue. So these are all values between 0 and 255. And so here I am just displaying the RGB, those numbers between 0 and 255. And then just for fun, I'm not going to show the details of this, but there are other color schemes. And so I'm showing a conversion to HSL, a different color scheme. And it depends of the red and the green and the blue, which one is the minimum one, and which one is the maximum one. And then there's some calculations. And I give up here a link to where I got the calculations that I used. So I'm not going to, if you're that interested, then download the example. I gave you the URL in the beginning, and you could look at that in more detail or look at the link. But I just wanted to do something with the colors. First, I wanted you to see what came straight out of it, which was the hex code with the pound sign, but that you can work with that and get other particular things if you want them, like the RGB or other color schemes from that. But it's a matter of doing some calculating. Here's the function called by the date input. Let me just grab straight out the value and display it. And so when we pick a date, this first one is just sort of what comes right out of the date input, which is year, month, day, separated by sort of hyphens. And again, if you want to do more than work, if you want to work with more than that, here I am splitting that. So that's some string, and I'm splitting it based on the hyphen delimiter and breaking into the pieces. And then JavaScript has a date object, and where you can put in sort of, I think it was Let me look again. This was year, month, day. So I'm making a date object, year, month, day. But in this date object in JavaScript, the months are 0 based. So I had to, so in normal sort of the string that comes out, January would be 1, but in the date object, it should be 0. So that's why I'm here subtracting a 1 from the month, which was parts, which was the part with an index of 1 after I did the splitting. So that is my date. I make if I just make a date object without any arguments, then that is now. And then I am subtracting the times for these two dates, and the dates come out typically in milliseconds. And so if I divide by 1,000, I'm going to divide by this big denominator, this difference between the date the user chose and now. And if I divide, the 1,000 converts it from milliseconds to seconds, the 60 from seconds to minutes, the second 60 from minutes to hours, and the 24 from hours to days. So this is going to be a difference of days. And when I made the object, I just put in the date and I didn't put in any time. So it's picking like the default part of the day, like, first thing at midnight or something. Whereas when I do now, it's picking up the current time. So when I do my calculation, it's not some clean number of days, but some fraction depending on what time of day, in what time zone I'm in and what time of day it is. Okay. And then I'm sort of displaying here just a string output of my object and my result of my days between. But anyway, so I have a quick thing in HTML that gets me a date, and I can easily display that date if I like that format, or I can do more work and get other things out of it. The flavor index, I'm not doing much. I console logged the E, what's coming out, so and the value of this. And so it's just as I'm typing. So this is in the console. So you would see in the console. Let me inspect, open up a console. And then as I'm typing, we see over in the console that it was an input type, and then I typed a C, and then an H, and let's go with cherry vanilla. And so whether I am typing or whether I'm selecting an option from the data list, those all count as inputs. And you can see that I have access to the as I type. I got the C, the CH, and then I got the full out cherry vanilla. So those are all typing as an input, as well as choosing from the list. And this was displaying it on the page. This was the behind the scenes consoling. For the second flavor function, I'm just putting it on the page. But that's the difference between these two, is not in the function, but in that this one was, the data list was dynamically loaded. Okay, I think I'm at the bottom, so that's what I wanted to show you in this example. And I thank you for your attention.